Pilot Guy, episode number 76.
Flight 209er, you are cleared for takeoff.
Roger.
LA departure 123.9er.
Roger. Request connected. Over.
Hello, you're listening to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, the view from my side of the cockpit door. I'm Captain Jeff, your host, broadcasting live from studio. I've forgotten the room number. 757 in the Hilton Hotel in beautiful downtown Milwaukee. In this episode, the Southwest hard landing at LaGuardia, an update on the Asiana 214 crash landing, a Virgin Australia 737 nearly runs out of gas or fuel, some updates on lithium batteries, and other stuff. So get all settled in, tray tables and seat backs in their upright and locked positions, electronic devices powered on. Flight 76 is ready for pushback. I got it all in before the thing faded out. A lot more to talk about than just that. Trust me. And you know me. You've listened to the show, right? You know that there's much more for me to talk about than I have time for, or you have time for. So, let's see. Let's start off with, I'm in, as I said, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it's Friday, the 26th of July. And I was out on a walk yesterday, and I was listening to the Airplane Geeks podcast. And I just wanted to mention it because it's a very, very good one. Well, they're all good, of course, but a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of things in their show, their most recent one that really piqued my interest. And I thought I must mention it on my next episode. The episode that I'm talking about of the Airplane Geeks podcast, 258, they had Lieutenant Colonel Brian Allen. He's a MAFS qualified pilot. That's the modular airborne firefighting system that they use on some units to put on the C-130 to fight fires. He is in the Air National Guard. A very, very interesting presentation on how that whole system works and what their role is in fighting fires. He's a very good representative of being an Air Force officer, Air National Guard officer, and representing Air Force pilot training, etc. So he has a good discussion at the end of the interview with him about this is an avenue that many of you should look into if you're interested in getting into flying for a career. Check out your local Air National Guard or Air Force Reserve unit. It may be just the ticket to get your dream airline job and also serving your country at the same time and serving our country. So very, very interesting interview and very well-spoken representative, Lieutenant Colonel Brian Allen. They also talked about some other things in the news, as they always do. David Vanderhoof talked about an airplane that I'd never heard of, the XF-84H Thunder Screech. You should listen to his presentation about that airplane. Very interesting. The Australia desk was very entertaining as well. And then, of course, our own, well, I can't really claim you, can I, Neil? Neil Braden, who has been a contributor to the Airline Pilot Guy several times. He was a guest on the portion of their program where they do something from, well, down under, of course, but Neil is from the UK, and there's a segment of the show called Across the Pond, and Peter is the one who hosts that portion of the show. And he, I guess he's had Neil on before, and Neil went on again and talked about what he's doing and his little slice of aviation. And so they talked about the Air Venture, the EAA, the stuff that's going on in Oshkosh next week, I believe. Lots of good stuff in that show. You should really check it out. And Neil, great job on your portion of the show, and it just made me proud. I know I have nothing to do with it, but anywho, so I just wanted to mention that, and I'll have a link to that episode in my show notes. And no, they did not pay me to promote their show. No, they didn't. I just love listening to it. All right, let me get back here to my notes. Let's see. Coffee Fund. Let me play this.
How much more coffee?
No thanks.
As you know, if you'd like to contribute to my coffee/beer/web hosting server costs, you may do that by... Oops, I turned my mic down. I want to turn the music down. There we go. You may do that by clicking on the Buy Me a Cup of Coffee button on my website, and that helps offset some of the costs of doing this podcast. And a special thank you to John, Keegan, Mike, Eric, and Mark. Thanks again, and some of you were repeat donators. Do appreciate it. Special thanks to you guys. Also, I mentioned the Dropbox promotion thing, and my Dropbox keeps on growing, which is great. I think I'm up to like 9.2 gigabytes of storage for free. So thank you very much. Those of you who responded to my plea for Dropbox storage. And let's see, this time it was Stephen, Jay, Super Dave MC, David, Chris, and Brad. Thank you, Ink Spots, for serenading us with the Java Jive, the official group for my coffee fund, I guess. Okay, now, last week, at the end, I did episode number 75, and I was coming home on Thursday, and I ended up meeting up with someone who has contributed to the show in the past, Justin. He is a Pinnacle Airlines first officer, and he dropped me a note and said that he was going to be in the Atlanta airport area on a specific day, and I said, well, turns out that so will I. And I was coming home that day from a 4-day trip. And so we met together. He actually made a special trip. I think he was kind of hanging out at the hotel waiting for word about an airplane that they were supposed to ferry or reposition. And so he got all dressed and took the hotel van to the airport and went through security just to talk to me. Isn't that nice? And then after our meeting, I guess we met for a couple hours and talked. He went back to the hotel, and I think he stayed there for another couple hours before he finally got some information about that airplane being ready to fly. So Justin, really enjoyed our meetup. Again, sorry I didn't even think to do a recording of our meeting, but I just wanted to mention it to everybody that we have a very engaged listenership, a community. And we talked about some great ideas when it comes to the website, and perhaps instituting some things in the future, like possibly a forum, possibly some kind of thing where people can add their photos and that kind of thing, their aviation photos, and it might be interesting for the community to see. So the big part of that is time. I don't have a heck of a lot of time to do that kind of thing, but perhaps with volunteers and that kind of thing, we can build it into something. So a lot of great ideas. It was just great talking with Justin, getting caught up. So just wanted to mention that as well. All right, let's start in with some stuff going on in the news. on July 22nd, which just so happened to coincide with the 30th anniversary of the Gimli glider. If you follow me on Twitter or Facebook, both of those, you can just do a search for Airline Pilot Guy, and you'll find my Twitter posts and Facebook page. I mentioned I came up with a little graphic and had a picture of the Gimli glider in its resting position on the Gimli Airport that day, July 22nd, 1983. There's also a great little documentary that the Canadian I think it's a Canadian broadcasting company or one of the Canadian television production companies came up with, and very interesting recap of that whole incident where the 767 ran dry of fuel, and the captain dead sticked it to what used to be an Air Force base or an air base, Canadian air base, and was shut down for years, and they were using it for some kind of racing or something, I don't know, that day that he landed it on the runway. Very, very interesting story. If you've never heard of it before, you should check it out. I'll try to remember to put that link in the show notes. But I kind of superimposed or juxtaposed that picture of the 767 on its nose, because the nose gear did collapse upon landing. I think it was because there was not enough hydraulic pressure to actually extend the nose gear that fatal day. Well, not fatal, but that day that they ran out of fuel. And so it came to rest on its nose. And if you've been listening to the news, also July 22nd, but this year at LaGuardia Airport, a Southwest Airlines 737 came into land, runway 4, and the nose wheel collapsed. And there were a couple links I'll put in the show notes to video. One is showing the very latter portion of the landing with sparks coming from under the undercarriage, and it kind of slides to a stop. Also, one of the passengers, I mean, heck, every flight seems there must be somebody with their camera phone, recording video. So you airline pilots out there, be aware. Make sure that every landing's a good one, because who knows when your flight might be up on YouTube. But anyway, this guy was sitting at the window on the right side, and you can kind of see out the window there, and the wing and the engine, and it's coming in for landing on runway 4, and then all of a sudden, the mayhem breaks out. Speaking of mayhem, I think I have some audio from that. Here, let's listen.
Tower Southwest 345 on the ILS-4.
Southwest 345 is running tower, number 2 for the landing, 4, we just did a
Hey, number 2 cleared to land, Southwest 345.
Car 90, unit frequency. Car 90, car 98, unit frequency. American 732, go around, time maintain 2000.
On the go, American 732.
Okay, I got that from liveatc.net, a great source for audio recordings of air traffic control communications and such. And I'm sure that whoever posted that, before I downloaded it, compressed that a little bit, because they were cleared to land, and then all of a sudden the tower controller is yelling at all the cars and telling people to go around and all that kind of stuff. So that was the ATC recording of the incident. And, when I was looking at the cell phone video, I thought, there's something odd about that. And I'm thinking, well, maybe it's just the way the guy's holding the camera. But it did look like they were nose low, that they didn't have a positive deck angle when they came in for landing. And I just heard today on the way to the airport on the news that there are reports, perhaps eyewitness reports, waiting for takeoff, perhaps somebody out there watching the Southwest 737 coming in for landing. Anyway, somebody noticed that when it touched down nose wheel first. And that's what we call in the aviation industry a wheelbarrow approach. The wheelbarrow that, I don't know, maybe it's called something in your country, but in the United States, wheelbarrow is just a one-wheeled device where you have the two handles in the back that you hold on to, one wheel in the front, and then you put in a bunch of stuff in to carry, and so you use leverage to carry, I don't know, concrete, heavy bricks, whatever, around in the wheel, dirt, and so we call this a wheelbarrowed landing or a wheelbarrow landing because the nose wheel touches down first. A lot of discussion about that kind of landing. In most cases, whether we're talking about general aviation, commercial aviation, business aviation, most airplanes landing on the nose wheel first is not good. The nose wheel is not specifically stressed for that kind of impact. Now, there are some airplanes that are designed to withstand that kind of impact. I think there was some discussion and videos of some Aviation, what is it, the IL, I can't remember the model number, coming in for landing, and several times it comes down in a nose low approach, and then sometimes the nose wheel touches down first. But that's a very, very beefy nose strut and nose wheel gear on that airplane. Somebody else mentioned that occasionally you see that happening with the Canadian regional jet, especially the RJ200 series, where when they're coming in for approach, they're in a nose wheel down attitude, and if they don't time it right in the flare, and some of you listening I know are RJ pilots, maybe you can kind of chime in on this, but I guess you'd have to time it just right so that you touch down on the main gear first. But we have seen, and there was some discussion in some of these forums about the fact that they have seen RJs land hitting the nose wheel first. But again, that is not something normally an airplane is designed to do or withstand. And turns out in this case, maybe, I don't know, there's no official report out there yet. I don't know if this came from the NTSB or some other source, that they actually, you know what, the article I was reading did say something about they went from 30 degrees to 40 degrees of flaps within a minute, like 54 seconds or 56 seconds before touchdown. And they think that maybe they weren't in a stabilized approach. I don't know what the stabilized approach criteria is for Southwest Airlines. I do know that Acme, at 1,000 feet, if we're not in a stabilized approach, in other words, final configuration and the speed either right at the bug reference speed or getting very close to it, then we cannot continue with a landing. We must go around. So I don't know if that's a situation where the Southwest crew got itself into a unstabilized approach for whatever reason. I did some testing today on a couple of my approaches, hitting the at 1,000 feet, hitting the stopwatch, the clock timer in the airplane, and I was getting a figure of about 1 minute 15 seconds or so at 1,000 feet. So if that equates to a 737 approach speed for landing, then at 56 seconds they were probably somewhat below 1,000 feet. Not a heck of a lot below. It's not like at the last minute they threw the flaps from 30 to 40 degrees, so we'll probably hear more about that and emphasis on stabilized approaches. But looks like it could possibly be human error, pilot error in this case, and not just a weakened nose wheel strut system. Now, to be honest with you, when I first heard this, I'm thinking to myself, and many of you out there know what I'm talking about, the Southwest guys and gals really like to taxi fast and seem to put a lot of stress, side loads on the main and nose wheel systems of their 737s. I was thinking to myself, I wonder if that has anything to do with, the weakening of the structure of the nose wheel strut system. But I don't know. Just something that popped into my head. So again, I'll have links to both videos on this hard landing at LaGuardia of Southwest Airlines 345, I believe. Okay, an update on Asiana 214. our U.S. Airline Pilots Association, ALPA, were objecting to and protesting the handling of the initial investigation by the NTSB, and the Korean Airline Pilots Association and the Asiana Pilots Association have chimed in as well and said that they are protesting because they're concerned the outcome won't accurately reflect the myriad of factors that are associated with aviation accidents because of the NTSB's public posture in this particular investigation. So they're not very happy about the NTSB's transparency. I talked about what I thought about that whole thing on the last episode, and my opinion has not changed about that. Another article in Aviation Week in Space Technology, dated July 15th by Guy Norris, talks about safety surprises from the Asiana crash investigation, and they're gleaning a lot of information from the crash and the structural loads that the airplane sustained, the evacuation procedures, etc. So we are learning a lot from this accident. One thing I had highlighted here is that when the airplane started its cartwheel, not cartwheel, but pirouette, I guess is the better description of what it did. At one point, the tail, the aft end, or where the tail is connected, the tail is of course gone because it smashed into that seawall. But at one point, the tail or the aft end of the airplane was at a 40-degree angle. Let's see. Traveling at over 100 miles per hour, the aircraft departed the runway at the touchdown markers, where it became partially airborne again, pirouetting in a complete 360-degree circle around its nose section. During this high-speed ground loop, the aft end of the tailless fuselage momentarily pitched up at around 40 degrees, causing passengers and crew in the back section of the cabin to fall vertically as much as 100 feet when the aircraft came to a rest with its nose pointed back toward the runway. Excuse me. Despite this pummeling, the fuselage structure remained substantially intact, with the extensively damaged wings appearing to have borne the brunt of the impact loads. Let's see. There was something else I wanted to read here to you. Let's see. Nevertheless, despite massive damage, investigators say the surprisingly small number of fatalities and relatively intact interior present a very survivable picture, with much of the internal trim, ceiling panels, and sidewalls still in place. This is partly thought to be due to Boeing's internal design concept, in which the tie rods supporting the arch of the secondary support structure, which holds the interior of the cabin, ceiling panels, and overhead bins to the fuselage monocoque, transfer loads above 46,000 pounds and withstand loads of up to 9 Gs. Tie rods were built to absorb up and down loads, while the truss-type sway bracing structure support the ceiling laterally. The seats are designed to meet the 16 G crash load certification standard, while the seat tracks were originally designed to cope with stresses of 9 Gs. And let's see, NTSB Chairman Jim Hall was commenting on the safety implications, and he questions the adequacy of the current 16G dynamic seat standard. I believe that it is time to update aviation seat standards to take a stronger G-force, especially in light of the many recent spinal and head injuries. Okay, so we're learning a lot from this. Perhaps they're going to recommend the standard to be even a higher G with capable seat. All right, moving on. Saw another article that 2 months before the fatal crash of Asiana Airlines Incorporated jet in San Francisco, the South Korean government asked the carrier to improve pilot training and to strengthen safety measures. That's from the South Korean Transport Ministry. So they were already seeing an increase in safety incidents with the airline, and wanted to do an inspection because they had some concerns about their pilot training and safety stuff. That's not a good word, stuff, but that's all I can think of right now. I'm tired. So there we go. So that's the Asiana update. Oh, and one more update that I didn't put in my notes here. I was listening to the news and heard that the television station in San Francisco, KTVU, I believe, the NBC affiliate, they aired the inappropriate Asian-sounding fake names of the pilots. By the way, if you like Stephen Colbert, the Colbert Report, do a search for Colbert Report in Asiana names, and you'll see kind of a funny bit regarding that. Again, slightly offensive if you are of Asian descent. Likely that could be offensive, so just a warning, but he does a little twist on that. But anyway, in addition to the NTSB firing that summer intern for confirming those bogus names, the station just announced yesterday, I believe, that they had fired 3 of the producers of the show that had something to do with, allowing that to actually get into that noontime newscast. A 4th person didn't get fired. Supposedly, I guess the person decided to step down because of health reasons or health issues, probably in order to try to save on or quit instead of be fired. I think you probably are. You have some benefits coming to you if you do it that way. I'm not sure, but anyway, so still suffering from the aftermath of that faux pas at the NBC affiliate in San Francisco. Okay, enough of that. This is very, very interesting. Again, I mentioned it on my Twitter feed, Airline Pilot Guy, and I said something to the effect that this incident would have made me suck the seat cushion of my seat almost completely into my anatomy, if you get my drift. This was an incident that just occurred relatively recently, and I guess, just earlier this month. A 737 Virgin Australia 737-800 landed. I'm starting to get that clicking sound again, aren't I? Okay. I'm going to pause and fix my audio, and I'll be right back. Let's see where I am over here on my video. 30. Okay. Okay, am I back? Any clicking? Any weird noises? No. Okay. Okay, so I'll edit that out in the video. And wow, did you hear about this? This made me think that, in fact, I was so amazed at this incident, putting myself into the pilot's seats, that I made a comment on, I think, Twitter, that I think that if this were me in this jet, or one of these 2 jets, that I would have been sucking up my seat cushion as far as it could go into my anatomy, if you get my drift. All right, just a few days ago, let's see. No? well, I'm not sure exactly when this happened, but, oh, here it is, June 18th, right there in front of me. On June 18th, there was a Qantas and Virgin Australia 737-800, I guess both were 737-800s, that were, well, they're coming from different places. I think the one was coming from Brisbane and another from Sydney, and they were both heading to Adelaide. And when they were planned, or when the dispatchers planned the flights, if they have dispatchers. By the way, Mike Carroll, the dispatcher at Acme that just started his blog, my50%.net, has a great blog post on this. I'll have the link in the show notes. But anyway, these two flights were dispatched to Adelaide, and apparently the weather forecast at the time was such that there was no need for a destination alternate. So they had their normal fuel load plus the 30 to 45 minutes of extra fuel over the required reserves. And at some point during the flight, they realized that the original forecast had changed, and dense fog was putting the airport below landing minimums. And then at some point, the decision was made to turn around and head back to the east to Mildura and try to land there, because at that moment the airport was above minimums as far as weather. But guess what? Very shortly after they made the decision to divert to Mildura, that airport went below minimums as well. Now Mildura only has non-precision approaches and only has a little over 6,000 feet of runway. And let's see, the Qantas flight made it in, and the Virgin Australia flight attempted an approach and had to go miss because I think the MDA is around 600 feet above the ground, 500 to 600 feet above the ground, and the fog was so thick that they couldn't see anything, and they went around. And then the last time they said, okay, well, we got to get the airplane on the ground because we're about to run out of fuel. And so they completed another non-precision approach. So at 600 feet on the second approach, the first officer made the brace announcement. And as he looked mostly out of the side window for reference, the captain flew the aircraft into the ground. Once down, the pilots could not determine the runway remaining, but safely stopped the airplane. According to the Australian Transportation Safety Board, the flight's total fuel after shutdown was 1,179 pounds. And let's see, I think there is a conversion here for those of you who are into the metric measurements, and 535 kilograms of fuel remaining in that 737. So basically what that means, folks, is this airplane was on fumes and it was about to run out of fuel and they were going to crash. So they were kind of at wit's end and had to do something. That airplane was going to be on the ground in a short period of time regardless of what they did. So they went ahead and tried to fly an approach, even though it was not a precision approach, into dense fog, and luckily they found the runway and they landed safely and nobody was injured. So that was an exciting incident, and again, it just gives me the shivers just to think about it. And again, you may read about this in Mike's blog, My 50%, at my50%.net. I'll have the link in the show notes. Okay, now, I talked about this on the last episode, the Ethiopian 787 over on the ramp at Heathrow. Remember the fire that caused the airport to be shut down for a few hours while the fire crews fought that fire. And I mentioned last time that Honeywell had sent some representatives to the location because there was some indication that the emergency locator transmitter located in the main passenger cabin ceiling area back toward the back of the airplane may have been what sparked the fire. And it turns out that the UK's Air Accident Investigation Branch, the AAIB, indeed has ruled that this unit, this emergency locator transmitter, was what caused the fire. And they don't know if it was because of a kinked wire or something else, but for some reason, the battery pack, which is a lithium manganese technology, caught on fire. And the troubling thing about this thing is that there was no other, there was no electrical source on the airplane. It was completely shut down. So the only thing they surmised could have caused this fire was that actual ELT that has its own internal battery pack. And the thing that's concerning to a lot of people is that this 787 is designed to fly extremely long flights, long legs. I think it's looking for extremely long ETOPS certification. And imagine being out over the middle of the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian Oceans with that ELT catching on fire and trying to put out that fire. And anytime that manganese is involved in a fire, it's very, very difficult to put it out. And at first, the fighting people at Heathrow tried to extinguish the blaze using halon bottles that are in the airplane, and that wasn't doing any good. They had to actually break the ceiling down, and they had to come in with fire hoses, a couple of them, pouring whatever, I don't know if it was water or retardant or whatever it was that they were putting on the area with the fire. But it took a lot to get that thing to go out. Okay, so imagine you're out in the middle of the ocean somewhere, hours away from any airport, and you have the same thing going on. I mean, it's hard to imagine a worse scenario, a fire on board an airplane that you really can't put out, and which could cause everybody to die of smoke inhalation because it's very hard to ventilate an airplane cabin when you can't really open the doors. And the other thing is it could lead to a loss of structural integrity, and of course that would result in the complete loss of the airplane and all its occupants. So a lot of concern out there regarding this thing, and I believe Honeywell has made like 6,000 of these units. Now there was some discussion again on the Airplane Geeks podcast about this incident, and I don't know this for sure. I don't know if that's, or the concern that they were talking about on their show was the fact that the Air Accidents Investigation Branch has recommended that operators that have this kind of ELT installed on their airplanes, that they deactivate it. And they were discussing, well, how can they do that? Because it's a requirement. Well, I did some research, and it seems from what I've been able to determine, it's not necessarily a requirement in every country. Some countries do require having an active working ELT on board, but I believe the United States is not one of those countries that actually requires it. And the other thing that I'm wondering about is that I know that the airplane that I fly, which is a much smaller airplane than the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, we have 2 emergency locator transmitters on board the airplane that I fly. So I'm wondering if there might be an ELT located in some other location on board the 787. I don't know. So it may be a moot point. But regardless of whether there are more than one ELT installed in each 787, or if they have to shut them down until they can check the wiring and ensure the safety, it doesn't really matter, does it? It's just something that they need to fix and at least inspect before they allow people to start using those things again. So now that leads to an article that I read regarding battery technology. Of course, yes, this did not have anything to do with the lithium-ion batteries that the Dreamliner has had problems with in the past. The fire on the Japan Air 787 in Boston, the arcing and possible fire of the other Japanese airline. I can't think of the ANA 787 in Japan, and they did an emergency landing and evacuation. The article is from where is this from? I think the Wall Street Journal. I'm not sure. No, from Bloomberg, by Alan Levin and Thomas Black. And the article's title is Lithium Power Seen Trumping Risk in Aircraft Battery Use. And they're basically saying that this is more than just a 787 issue. The issue is that we're requiring more and more power and backup power for modern airplanes and our electronic devices, our phones, our laptop computers, our tablet devices, etc. And the technology that has the most bang for the buck, the most energy per volume and weight, is the lithium-ion battery technology. The problem is that it's kind of a risky technology, as we've seen, and it can go into thermal runaway and go out of control. You remember back not too long ago, just a few years ago, where people's iPhones were exploding, the batteries were exploding, and laptop computer batteries, etc. In fact, it's brought down an airplane. The UPS 747 crashed in Dubai about 2 or 3 years ago, and they had a load, not the entire load, but a very a significant number of lithium-ion batteries aboard this airplane that caught on fire, and basically it overcame the crew, the smoke and fumes, and they crashed and completely lost the entire airplane and the lives of the crew members, 2 pilots, I believe, 747-400. So it's not the first time that battery problems have caused major problems with airplanes. And so, like anything in aviation or any other transportation technology, safety is a balance. It's risk versus benefit. Now, honestly, if we want to make aviation as safe as possible, we wouldn't actually get into an airplane and go flying, right? That's the safest thing to do, is just don't get in the airplane. Don't fly. Automobile safety, highway safety, don't drive. Stay at home, walk. Well, that may not be safe either, but you get my drift. Does the risk of driving in your car to the airport or driving the car to the grocery store outweigh the benefit? Hey, we have to eat. I got to go to the store. Okay. I could walk. I could ride my bike. I could drive my car. I need to fly from New York to California. I could take a train. I could take a bus. I could drive my car. I could walk. But I'd rather take an airplane, because the benefit is it's not going to take me that long. And overall, it's probably going to cost me less to take an airplane than it would be in any other form of transportation. Okay. There's risk, right? We're getting up into a flying machine, and there's always the possibility that something bad could happen, right? So risk versus benefit. And safety is all about balancing that. So, is there a risk? Are we willing to take that risk based on whatever the benefit's going to be to us? And so our modern aviation industry has evolved into a very, very safe industry, at least commercial aviation. And so obviously the benefit is huge and the risk is minimal. So that kind of carries over into this whole lithium technology for batteries. And what is going to be too much risk? Do we need to go back to the older technology, which does not have the same benefit, but the risk is not as great? So this is always sliding the scale of risk versus benefit. And so that's going to continue to be a big discussion, I believe, especially if we continue to have problems with lithium-ion technology. Okay, well, I meant to play this before, so for the Southwest, but I'm going to play it now for this incident.
Ted, that was probably the lousiest landing in the history of this airport. For some of us here, particularly me, I'd like to buy you a drink and shake your hand.
Yes, that was possibly the worst landing at this airport. Remember the Superjet, the Sukhoi, what is that model number? I don't remember, 99 or something like that. The one that was on a demonstration flight in Indonesia, and the pilots flew into a mountain, controlled flight into terrain. They're continuing to do certification on that airplane. It's basically a Russian-made regional jet, and the article starts off by saying that the manufacturer, Sukhoi, is putting the best spin it can on the belly landing of one of its Superjet test aircraft in Iceland on Tuesday. 3 pilots and 2 certification experts were aboard the aircraft during crosswind tests of its Autoland system when, according to Sukhoi, the plane touched the runway with retracted landing gear. One of the certification experts broke his leg getting out of the plane, but there were no other injuries. Sukhoi said in a statement that the mishap has no bearing on the commercial operation of the aircraft, since none of the airlines currently flying the aircraft use the Autoland feature. Tuesday's incident comes a little more than a year after the Superjet on a sales promotion flight crashed into a mountain in Indonesia. So everything was going wonderfully well with this Autoland test, except apparently somebody forgot to put the gear down. So not good. Of course, there may have been some other factors involved in this, but just thought I'd mention that. And let's go on to automation, one of my favorite subjects. You may have seen this in the Wall Street Journal. Let's see, when was this? Several days ago, about a week ago or so. The man's name that wrote this editorial has, guy's name is Jenkins. And the title of his opinion piece is Bring in the Robots, Why Accidents Are Rarer and Humans More Often at Fault. Okay, that's true. Accidents are getting more rare, and humans more often, at least as a percentage, are at fault more and more. That's because we humans really aren't changing that much, but technology is. So that's the reason why the scale of human versus mechanical problems with crashes is kind of leaning more toward human error. But that does not necessarily mean, as he seems to point out in his, or tries to draw a conclusion in his opinion piece, that because of that, let's just go ahead and bite the bullet and just make everything automated, totally autonomous, humanless, pilotless airplanes. Well, that is a huge jump, and it's a major leap, and I think it's a flawed reasoning leap. And one of the things that kind of irritates me a little bit, and I hope to interview Captain Malcolm Scott, Jenkins kind of referred to him. He's a British Airways pilot, and he, in a British Airways safety magazine, I think it's called Flight Deck, a year or two ago or so, wrote an article regarding automation and human interface with automation and the transition that we're making with more and more automated airplanes. And I looked up the article myself, the source document, which was not easy to do, but I found it. And I read, because I thought to myself, now you're using Captain Malcolm Scott's article in the safety magazine as ammunition or proof that your conclusion or recommendation in this instance is to go with completely automated airplanes, no humans in the cockpit. And I'm thinking that can't be right. So I read the article, and no, he was being a little tongue-in-cheek when he said that that passengers would eventually just say, that this is going to happen anyway, so we might as well go ahead and do it now. So anyway, I got a little irritated by this whole opinion piece. And again, I think it's just somebody that who is not a pilot, doesn't really understand the technologies available today, and they don't understand that there are so many things that only a human brain can assess if something goes wrong. And I can detail so many instances where automation has failed, and if it weren't for somebody in that airplane to use their brain to come up with a solution to the problem, the DC-10 crash in Sioux City, the two-engine failure, the Miracle on the Hudson, Captain Sully Sullenberger. Well, there are many, many instances that I could point out that if it had not been for a pilot, a human being in that cockpit, those would have been complete losses. Everybody would have lost their lives in those cases. So we're not quite there yet, and I doubt really that we'll ever be at that point. So again, that was irritating to me. Again, somebody making a very, very simple, seemingly rational deduction, which was very, very flawed. And speaking of automation, and I'll have a link. I'll try to find. I hope I wrote the link down somewhere to Captain Malcolm Scott's article in Flight Deck magazine. Another thing that somebody made me aware of, and I'm so glad they did. I think it was it Jason? Now I'm trying to remember exactly who tipped me off on this YouTube to begin with, and I had somebody else also mention it to me. And it's a YouTube video of Captain, and this was back in 1997 at the American Airlines Flight Academy. Captain Warren Vanderberg of American Airlines focuses on automation dependency. And, where have you heard that term before? Automation complacency, automation dependency. Yeah, I keep railing on it, right? This is way back in 1997. How many years ago was that? 15 years ago? Yeah, 16 years ago. Here we are in 2013, and we're still having trouble grasping this. In fact, I would argue that automation dependency and automation complacency is even worse now than it was back in 1997. I'll definitely have a link to this YouTube video, and you have to, even if it means stopping my podcast right now and don't even listen to the rest of it. Honestly, this is such an important video that you need to watch, because I can't tell you how spot on Captain Warren Vanderberg is. And you know what? I have a couple clips here, so bear with me. I know it's going to take some time. But let me first start off, and I have 3 separate clips, and one of them is like 5 minutes long. So I do apologize, but trust me, it's worth putting in the show, and it's worth you listening to. And I can't agree with Captain Vanderberg anymore. It's just, he's spot on here. So let's take a listen to Children of the Magenta.
What we're trying to say here, and I think what Cecil's trying to say here, is that we have to go back. Back when I started 25 years ago with American Airlines, I was an engineer on the engineer seat for low 7 or 8 years, and every time I came back here to recurrent training, I sat in that engineer seat and I listened to those check airmen telling those pilots, fly the plane first, fly the plane first. And the pilots did. They flew the plane first. But then about 15 years ago, we started to become more and more automated in our cockpits, and as the level of automation increased, more and more we started talking about pushing buttons up here on an AFDS manual or typing in typewriters down here, okay, to make the airplane's flight path adjust. Because we were being told by the industry that we were to become automation managers. But the accident history of the first 6 years of the 90s clearly shows automation managers, plugging themselves into the ground all over this planet.
Okay, that's the first clip, and here's another little clip that I thought was very important.
We are not automation managers. We are captains and pilots. And by our aviator skills, we are to ensure the vertical and lateral paths of these planes at all times. We will use the wonderful tools of automation that have been provided to us to help us with that task. But when the automation is not maintaining the intended flight path, we will turn it off and maintain the path by our skills. As an example of approach parameters, if you're coming down a non-precision approach and the autopilot's engaged and you're in the last segment of this and you're in vertical speed and it becomes apparent that your airplane for some reason or another is going to go through MDA, is it time to push altitude hold? It's not, is it? It's time to go click, 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 boom, because you can stop it at MDA. The autopilot can't. Or how about this? Let me ask you guys out here, the 7576 community, the A300 guys et al. What's the most often asked question in our cockpits? What's it doing now? Right? And I'm going to suggest to you if that question gets asked in a low altitude environment, the pilot flying should really be going click, 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 click. This airplane is departing from its intended flight path for some reason. Don't allow it. Maintain the path. Stabilize it, trim it up, and then say, why did it do that? And if it turns out to be mode confusion, which most likely it was, if you want to bring your computer up and put your autopilot and connect it back to it, fine. But don't allow the deviation. And then bottom line on this, to maintain flying skills. It's probably the most important segment in this automation dependency issue. As every pilot in this room understands, you know, if we're coming in somewhere and we decide we're going to get some hand flying time or something, and so we turn off our autopilot but we don't turn off our auto throttles, are we flying? No. We're just guiding the airplane to the V-bars. There's not even a requirement for a cross-check here. To maintain piloting skills, we must both manipulate the controls and manage the energy of the airplane. In doing so, it requires a cross-check and the maintenance of normal piloting skills. You know, Cecil's a great leader. I'll say that with him in here even. He's a great leader, and and Cecil would never say to you, you will. It ain't going to happen. He's a leader. But what Cecil is saying is as often as you can, pilots of American Airlines, when you deem the situation is right, to practice your skills, turn off your autopilot and your auto throttles, fly your planes, maintain your skills, so that the day something happens, you will have the proficiency and the complete confidence in your own ability to take over an airplane and fly it in any circumstance successfully. Listen to what I just said. I didn't change any procedure in American Airlines. None of them. If you take off with the auto throttles on, take off with the auto throttles on. What I said was when you turn off the autopilot with the intention of hand flying to maintain skills, turn off the auto throttles too. Maintain your skills.
And one wonders if the Asiana pilots had practiced this, they wouldn't have assumed, again, this is all preliminary, just based on the facts that were released by the NTSB, assuming that the auto throttle system is working and providing proper speed control, perhaps if they had practiced manual flying with the auto throttles off, cross-checking airspeed, perhaps that tragedy would not have occurred. And a couple other comments here. Cecil, he's referring to at that time, was the chief pilot at American Airlines. And secondly, when he talks about click, 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 click on the control yoke or the side stick controller to disconnect the autopilot, you hit a button, and the first time you click it, it turns off the autopilot, and then also at the same time sounds a warning that the autopilot has been disconnected, just in case it disconnects on its own without you telling it to disconnect. The second click on that same button extinguishes or stops the warning. So, and depending on the airplane, if you're pretty good at it, you can click it and click it. If your timing's just right, you can do it. You can disconnect the autopilot without getting the oral warning that you've disconnected, which is very, very irritating for good reason. The Eastern Airlines L-1011 that crashed in the Everglades, they could have used a system that warned them that the autopilot was no longer engaged. They did not have that system. In fact, it was because of that crash and some others that the FAA required this oral warning to sound if the autopilot's disconnected. So click to disconnect, click again to stop the warning or prevent it from happening. So click, click. And then on the throttles, you have a button on the side of the throttle quadrant, on the knobs, that you click to turn off the auto throttles. And again, click again to stop the warning, whether it be an oral warning or a visual warning, that you have disconnected your throttles. So when he's saying click, 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 that's your left hand and your right hand, or if you're a first officer, the reverse. And he's saying fly the airplane and practice flying the airplane. This is back in 1997, folks. So this is nothing new. And at Acme, back in the early 90s, we were having the same discussion because of the concern of this new automation taking over and people losing their pilot skills. And finally, I'll play one more excerpt from this Children of the Magenta, and this is the very last portion of the video, and it basically sums up everything.
We are, first and foremost, captains and pilots. But we must also be effective cockpit managers. On our automated flight decks, we must manage the various levels of automation available to us. Clearly, increasing levels of automation will reduce workload in most scenarios. However, we must change the culture that drives us to operate at the highest levels at all times. Automation lacks the ability to create flexible responses to unanticipated changes in flight path requirements. So, in these circumstances, a lower level of automation should lower workload and thereby preclude us from becoming task-saturated and losing our situation awareness.
Did you get that? You know, I've told you in the past that we old heads, the older generation pilots, when things start getting more and more intense, when you start experiencing problems, the weather is really going down the tubes, at least with me, my security is peeling off some of the layers of automation, and sometimes even completely flying the airplane manually, because I feel like I'm in control of the situation. I'm in control of the airplane. I can feel the forces of nature acting upon this airplane. I know what the airplane's doing. I don't have to guess what the automation is doing with the airplane. And that's what he's saying, that last comment that he made. You know, we have to know when to peel the layers of automation off, not put more on. And again, my concern is that the newer generation of pilots out there, it's the opposite. When things start getting worse, conditions start deteriorating, the automation levels go higher and higher and higher. Almost as if I throw everything on, you know, it's going to be that big red button. Remember, we talked about this in an earlier episode, that some company wants to make some kind of a system that if the pilots lose control of the airplane, we hit this red, panic button, like, from Staples, and somehow the automation, recovers the airplane. The problem is the automation sometimes gets us into those situations, or our misunderstanding of what it's doing. And so it's like completely, the reasoning and rationale is completely upside down with a system that's supposedly going to save an airplane from humans. Humans, and please remember this, humans are what's going to save an airplane from crashing when the automation fails. And it will. Automation's not perfect. It never will be. All right. So, and just one more thing. So I received some audio feedback from Nick Jackson that kind of ties in with this whole theme about hand flying, basic pilot skills. Let's hear from Nicholas Jackson.
Hi, Captain Jeff. It's Nick Knack. I run a podcast of my own, and I just wanted to leave you a message and say I completely agree with your content on episode 74. I think more hand flying skills need to be practiced. Personally, I'd like to see it if airline pilots were encouraged by their airlines to say go up in a 172 just to practice those hand flying skills, because I know as a flight simulator pilot I run high detail models of the 777 and the like, and I can say especially on those long international flights, when you have LNAV and VNAV engaged and you're just letting the automation do the work, you really do lose those hand flying skills. So I completely agree that that's something that probably should be encouraged and worked on, and keep up the great podcast. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Nicholas Jackson, and you didn't, you're so modest, mention your own podcast. And I did a little bit of searching and found that he has a podcast called Nick Knack Podcast, I believe. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Nicholas. You can do a search on iTunes, and he's in his 7th season. He's been doing this for a very, very long time, much longer than I have. And so regarding your feedback, sir, I do agree with you agreeing with me about the hand flying thing. Not so sure that I agree with your premise that it would somehow enhance. I think it would to a certain extent, like going out in a 172 and hand flying in 172. But I think it's really, really, that's a low performance airplane. And the airplanes that we're flying are very high performance airplanes, very large airplanes, very heavy airplanes, completely different flight envelope. And I think that while flying a 172 definitely can't hurt your flying skills, I think that we have to do, as Captain Vanderberg mentioned in his video, we have to do it in the airplanes that we fly for a living. These big transport class airplanes, hand fly them, because that is when you're going to need those skills. When the automation fails, something goes wrong, you have to know what you're doing. If the Air France 447 pilots knew how to fly that airplane by hand, perhaps they'd still be around here today to talk about it, along with the 228 passengers. I can't remember the number now, but a bunch of innocent lives lost out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in 2009. So, again, my soapbox is getting really, really high, so let me step down a few notches, and let's hit this. Into the wide blue yonder, flying high into the sun. I used to know all the words to this song because I was an Air Force officer. Okay, enough of that. The Air Force aims to land more Top Guns amid pilot shortage, the headline says. Help wanted, at least 130 veteran military aviators for a 9-year commitment to fly fighter jets. Salary, $34,500 to $97,400, plus good benefits and a $225,000 signing bonus. guaranteed. Contact the U.S. Air Force by September 30th. And that's the offer from the Pentagon, which is so short of Air Force fighter pilots that it's boosting its salary package to make the job more enticing. And let's see, the Air Force just recently revealed it has a shortage of 200 fighter pilots this year. And if something isn't done, the Air Force, which has about 3,000 fighter pilots, fears it may face a shortfall of 700 by the year 2021. And so they're out there actively trying to recruit pilots. Now, I just realized at first I was thinking they were just looking for new fighter pilots, new recruits, but no, I think that that's something I missed in the very first sentence there. 130 veteran military aviators are being searched out for to sign a 9-year commitment to fly fighters. So, hey, if that applies to you and you're listening to this podcast, contact the U.S. Air Force by September 30th. And just a little side note about drones. I saw this last week, didn't get a chance to mention it. In Deer Trail, Colorado, which I'm not sure where that is, they're expected to vote on August 6th an ordinance that would sell hunting licenses and provide rewards to its citizens for destroying federal property if it appears overhead in the form of an unmanned aerial drone. Wow, do you hear that rain in the background? It is really coming down. I was thinking, sounds like somebody's toilet or bathtub is leaking. I'm not sure if that's being picked up by the microphone. But it's really raining hard outside. A little line of thunderstorms that I worked my way through today between Minneapolis and Milwaukee has finally reached Milwaukee. Okay, anyway, this town in Colorado is hoping to pass this ordinance and sell hunting licenses so that if they see a drone from the United States federal government that is known to be owned or operated by the U.S. government, then they will offer rewards, $100 rewards to shooters licensed. I think the license is $25. And the FAA says in response, leave the drones alone. It says a Colorado proposal to reward residents who shoot down drones could cause legal problems for anyone who tried. The FAA said this week, shooting at an unmanned aircraft could result in criminal or civil liability, just as would firing at a manned airplane. The FAA is responsible for all civil airspace, including that above cities and towns, and the agency is working to ensure the safe integration of unmanned aircraft. So they're basically warning town officials of Deer Trail, Colorado, to not pursue this any further. Do not pass this ordinance. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. That's a reference to a game here in the United States called Monopoly, which I don't like. All right, that's enough of the news. It is time for us to do some feedback. But before I do, I need to go get something to eat. So I'll either be back here in my hotel room in Milwaukee or from some other location. So stay tuned. I mean, do you really have a choice? I don't think so. Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Airline Pilot Guy podcast, or Airline Pilot Guy Show, episode number 76. And as you can see, my surroundings have changed a bit. I started the podcast in Milwaukee, and now I'm breaking one of my rules again, recording at home, but that's okay, because everybody, well, not everybody, my wife and my oldest daughter have gone to bed. It's quite late, almost midnight, and my youngest daughter is visiting a friend of hers, and my son is out. I don't know where the heck he is, but he's out with friends. And so pretty much sort of had the house to myself. But I'm down here in my, what I call my dungeon, my man cave, my my home recording studio. It's really not much of a home recording studio. A little bit different setup than what I use when I'm on the road. And if you could look around here, you'd see I have some screen printing equipment down here. A little side business that I thought I'd start several years ago. Didn't work out to be that successful. But I still do a job or two printing T-shirts and that kind of thing for friends and people that I know from my church and stuff, just to help them out. Some fellow podcasters and that kind of thing. Anywho, I went and had dinner last night at the restaurant in the hotel in Milwaukee. Very nice, the Chop House. And I got back to the room and I thought, it's getting late. Got to get up early. It was a 4:40 pickup time in Milwaukee this morning. And so I thought, I'm not gonna finish the show. Now, I did say that when I came back, I would do some feedback. So I feel I owe it to you to do at least a little bit of feedback and then release this episode. So this morning, flew from Milwaukee to Atlanta to Miami and back. And kind of nasty weather in Miami. In fact, they closed the airport for some time due to heavy rain and thunderstorms. And we were just about to start a holding pattern, and they went ahead and let us come in, and we landed in moderate rain, and it was quite a challenging landing, but we managed to safely and successfully complete that flight. And then back to Atlanta, dodging some thunderstorms here and there. But the irony of this is that I picked this trip up, this 2-day trip, as extra flying, because I thought, and I looked at the weather and I thought, yeah, no problem. Looks like everywhere we're going is going to be really, really nice weather. So this will be a piece of cake, right? Hell, it never is. And going into Milwaukee the other day, yesterday, landed in moderate rain. And then again, my leg into Miami, again, moderate rain. And so I'm getting a lot of experience doing that. So anyway, got back this afternoon. Home around, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and got a chance to reconnect with the family. And as I mentioned, some are here, some are not, but pretty much I'm the only one that's awake right now in the house, and it's almost midnight. So this part of the podcast episode is brought to you by one of my favorite beers. And definitely one of my favorite brewing companies, Sierra Nevada. And this happens to be the Torpedo Ale, which is a what does it say? Something IPA here. Extra IPA. A very nice hoppy beer. So that's the sponsor of this episode, or this part of the episode. I'm making noise with something. I don't know what I'm doing here. Anyway, so let us get on with a little bit of feedback. I'm going to knock out some audio feedback, some of which was sent to me quite some time ago. Again, everybody who has sent me feedback in the last month or so, I do apologize for taking so long to get to answering it. And if for some reason I didn't get yours on this episode, I'll certainly try to, at some point in the future, answer your question, either through this podcast or directly through email. So let's start with this. And the other thing I want to say is, if I have already played your audio feedback or have answered your question, I apologize. I sometimes forget, and as you know, I'm not a very good organizer. Don't write down everything that I talk about on the show, and I guess I need some staff to kind of keep track of this stuff, write all this stuff down so that I know, whose feedback I've answered, etc. But I don't. It's just me. So I apologize ahead of time if I've already played some of this feedback. Okay, so let's listen to this from England.
Hi Captain Jeff, it's Reese here over from across the pond in England. Got a quick question for you today. I've been watching numerous flight videos of where you see commercial aircraft crossing the Atlantic, and I seem to notice a recurring pattern, which is when they're actually crossing on the actual nap track, they don't seem to use LNAV and instead use the heading selector to fly the route. Can you just explain why this is? Does LNAV not function over the ocean? I think it's got something to do with true and magnetic north, but your knowledge to be shared would be much appreciated. Thank you very much, and I love the show, and I look forward to a future episode.
Love your accent, Reese. Thanks again for sending feedback. I flew the North Atlantic tracks when I was in the Air Force on the 141, and when we flew it, we didn't use heading select. We used, or headings, we used lateral navigation. So I'm not sure. Perhaps you could do this. Do me a favor, Reese. Send me some links to the videos that you're talking about where they are using heading select mode and not LNAV. It could be that these routes that you are seeing on YouTube or the videos are polar routes, and perhaps I've never flown a polar route. Perhaps because of the magnetic heading and true heading variants or differences, that's why they are using that mode instead of lateral navigation. Again, though, I'm thinking that lateral navigation still should make all those corrections for you. But again, I could be wrong. Just ask my wife. Perhaps you're listening out here, Jeff Felmuth, first officer at American, and I know I have some other pilots listening who fly international flights. Perhaps you know the answer to this question. So help me answer this question for Reese. But Reese, that's possible. What the deal is here, it might be those polar routes, and has something to do, as you suspect, with magnetic and true heading and variances or variation between the two. So I'm sorry I don't really have a good answer for you, but I do appreciate your question. And again, help me out, folks. Let me know what's going on. Oh, Reese, and you can help me by sending me some links to the videos that you're talking about. Okay? All right. Employee of the month. I got this from a couple of you. Let's see, Steve and Brian Hunziker from Northern Virginia sent me a link to this YouTube video where I think this was in Hong Kong. It was a China Air Cargo guy. Well, actually, I don't know if it was China Air Cargo, but it was China Air, and it was one of the ramp workers loading the airplane with the passenger's luggage, and it just so happened that the passenger, or one of the passengers on the flight, while they're sitting there on the ramp by the window, is using his video camera or a cell phone video to record this guy and his handling of the luggage, and it's not pretty. It's not pretty at all. So again, I'll try to remember to put the link in the show notes. Very funny watching. Well, I guess it's funny unless it's your luggage, because he's not being very delicate and careful with the luggage. Let me just put it that way. So very, very humorous. Okay, PJ in Houston wrote in and said he was listening to episode 69. He says, I'm still catching up, almost there. Well, I'm still trying to catch up on feedback, PJ, so we're even. He said, I heard you mention the Craig, or CRG, waypoint near Jacksonville, saying that you weren't sure if there was a town there named Craig or not. It's actually a VORTAC, I know that, located on what is now called Jacksonville Executive Airport, formerly Craig Field, which was originally a joint military-civilian airport with an Army Aviation unit and Florida Air National Guard helicopters before they moved across town to Cecil Field, once the Navy ceased using that as a naval air station. The guys on the Flight Time Radio Show podcast are based in Jacksonville and actually broadcast their show live on AM radio in Jacksonville on Saturday afternoons, and they reference Craig Airport quite often. And he said, an interesting side note, according to Wikipedia, the Blue Angels had their first ever show at Craig Field in 1946. So PJ, thanks for filling in the gaps on that. Yeah, I knew that Craig was a VORTAC, and that's what I thought was kind of interesting about it, because listening to that flight engineer do his public address, his PA, and then mentioning their route of flight, taking them over Craig. And my point was that probably very few people, unless you live in the Jacksonville area or you're a pilot, everybody else is not going to recognize that as a geographic location or point. And that's why instead of saying Craig, I would say Jacksonville, Florida, because most everybody's heard of Jacksonville, Florida. So thanks again, PJ, for your feedback. And he also sent me some other feedback. I don't have time on this episode to read it. Let's move on with, let's see, here's a short one from Sam Paul. You have talked about aerotoxicity a few times on APG and didn't know if you and your listeners had heard that the F-22 pilots were complaining of this problem. And he said he includes a link to the 60 Minutes episode of where 2 National Guard pilots went to the news media to expose the problems with the fighter. He says, love your show, keep it going, and let me know when you're in the LA area so I can treat you to a beer or two. Best regards and safe flying, Sam. Thanks, Sam, and thanks for the link to the 60 Minutes. And by the way, I had mentioned on an earlier episode that I had received the documentary Welcome Aboard Toxic Airlines, I believe is the name of it. A British documentary filmmaking company sent me a copy of this, and believe it or not, I still haven't finished watching. It's a really interesting documentary. When I finish, I'll give you my thoughts on both the documentary, this syndrome called aerotoxicity, and what we can do about it. By the way, today, one of the airplanes I was flying in, the one we took down to Miami and back to Atlanta, had a very strong exhaust smell through the air conditioning pack system. I think it was mostly when we were just using the APU as a source. And I kept thinking to myself, here I am, I'm breathing this stuff, and this documentary is talking about aerotoxicity, and I'm thinking, I hope that I don't, I'm not damaging my health by breathing this air. So, again, I'll let you know what I think about this whole thing and what we can do about it. If it's definitely something to be concerned about, which I believe it might be. Let's see. More about navigation. Matthew writes from Canada. I was wondering if you could explain how navigation works using VORs and how GPS will differ. Can you please explain the difference between a VOR DME approach and an ILS and how you use charts for both approaches? I believe that for a non-precision approach, you would use the Jeppesen charts to tell you what angle or rate of descent to use at a certain distance from the beacon, but with the ILS, you no longer need this information. Is this correct? Okay, so GPS, Global Positioning System, is basically just a form of area navigation. We have inertial navigation, we have inertial reference platforms, we have various means of navigating almost like a self-contained navigation. Of course, GPS is not self-contained because you're relying upon a signal from a satellite orbiting in space. But the way all those area navigation or lateral navigation systems differ from using ground-based navigation is that the GPS and other lateral navigation were using waypoints instead of actual although sometimes the waypoints coincide with actual ground-based navigational aids. It's much more accurate. Your track is very, very clearly defined. You can travel between or to and from points that are not based solely or anchored by ground-based navigational aids. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility for routings. So we talked about the accuracy, more flexibility in the flight routings. If you are flying an airplane that does not have an FMS and lateral navigation, and you are just set up for VOR flying, like the old 727s that we flew, the 737-200 models, the DC-9s that we're still flying at Acme, they don't have the fancy navigation systems. You basically fly courses. You tune in the VORTAC, the navigational aid, and then you, looking at your chart, you see that the outbound course is 300 degrees, so you put 300 in your window, and then at a certain point, sometimes it's designated at a certain mileage from that navigational aid, you transition or tune in the next navigational aid and update your course, and you track that inbound. If that is not notated or noted, then you would split the difference. So if the distance between the two navigational aids was, let's say, 100 nautical miles, then at the 50-mile point, you would switch over to the next navigational aid, tune that in, identify it, and put in the new course, and then you'd track that course. On the 727, you could hook up the autopilot to track the course, but it wasn't very steady, or it wasn't. It would kind of, because the signal from the navigational aid sometimes wasn't so strong or stable. The airplane would kind of just wallow. It would track this way, turn a little bit, make a correction, turn back, and so what we'd normally do is just leave the airplane flying through the autopilot in heading mode, and then we'd just adjust the heading using the autopilot to track the course. I can tell you this, flying that kind of an airplane where you're using ground-based navigational aids as opposed to flight management computer and all hooked up to the lateral navigation really keeps you in the game a lot more, because you really do have to pay attention exactly where you are, where you're going, what your course is, making heading changes based on the winds. So you're really aware of the wind patterns and everything else, because you're having to actively make corrections yourself to your course all along the entire flight. So in a lot of ways, it keeps you more connected with your navigation than on today's modern navigation systems, where they do such a great job. It's just easy to kind of just assume that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that's where it can get you in trouble. So let's see, difference between VOR or ILS approaches and ILS approaches, or the difference between a non-precision and a precision approach. And Matthew, yes, you're right. An ILS, an instrument landing system approach, uses an electronic glide path that gives you accurate information as far as your glide slope heading to the runway, whereas a non-precision approach like a VOR or VOR DME approach, you have to kind of approximate a glide path. So when you hit the final approach fix, you set a certain descent rate, typically 700, 800 feet per minute, and you come up with a derived decision altitude. So you're almost kind of creating a precision approach from a non-precision approach. And then at a certain point, if you don't have the runway environment in sight, the runway in sight, and you've reached your derived decision altitude, and you're still in the soup, you execute a missed approach. Now the difference between a non-precision procedure that I just described and a precision approach is that when you reach the altitude where you're not going to descend below, you have to kind of pay particular attention to where the missed approach point is, because again, that's based on a non-precision approach. the missed approach point may be a point beyond where you are when you hit that altitude to make your decision whether to continue to land or not. And whereas a precision approach, when you're coming down on that precision glide path and you hit the point where you make the decision to continue to land or to execute a missed approach, it's right there. So that's one of the differences. There are probably several differences between the two, but I would say that that's mostly the difference. So I believe that you kind of nailed both of those answers through your question, believe it or not. So thanks, Matthew, for your feedback. Looks like PJ, again, sent me some feedback regarding, let's see, sitting here at IAH, Houston Intercontinental, waiting for a flight, and I just saw an American Airlines Super 80. He says maybe not having the extra weight from painting the plane is what makes it super. I think that the designation Super 80 is just kind of a marketing designation that American Airlines decided to use when referring to their MD-80 series airplanes. I don't believe McDonnell Douglas had anything to do with Super 80s, although I can't tell you how many times I'm flying around and people are talking about follow the Super 80. I'm thinking, where? I don't see a Super 80. Now, typically they just call us MD-80s instead of 88s, but that's okay. We're an 80 series. Let's see. He just saw one of these Super 80s push off the gate, and it brought up a question that I've had. On the nose gear of the DC-9/MD-80 8890 series aircraft, there is a piece that trails back from the wheels parallel to the ground. What purpose does this piece serve? I've not noticed anything similar on other aircraft types. And I believe you're talking about the nose gear, right behind the two nose wheels. And I don't think it's on the DC-9, at least not the DC-9s that we have at Acme. But on the MD-80 series and 90 series, and I believe the Boeing 717, you'll notice that right behind the nose wheels is something that almost looks like a chalk that is trailing behind them. In fact, when I first saw the airplane and saw it taxiing around, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they have some kind of foreign object that is affixed to their nose gear, and maybe we should tell them. And it turns out that this apparatus that is right behind and mounted upon or on the nose gear on the MD-80, MD-90 series is actually a spray deflector. And so when you're in wet conditions, the water that's being kicked up by the nose wheels are hit that, and it's deflected and dispersed, so it doesn't get flown or thrown up into the fuselage of the airplane, and it could, believe it or not, actually get thrown up toward the engines in the back. The main landing gear also have spray deflectors as well, and so that's what those are there for, to kind of when you're in water or wet conditions or even snow, the spray deflectors will keep the nose wheel and main landing gear wheels from kicking up stuff that may get sucked into the engines. Okay, so let's move on. Let's listen to some more audio feedback. And I'm going to head over here I'm doing this a little bit differently than I normally do when I'm on the road, so bear with me. Oh, this is from Alex. Let's hear what he has to say.
Hello, greetings, Captain Jeff. My name is Alex Meneses. I'm a CRJ 700 first officer for American Eagle in the city of Miami. First off, I'd like to start this audio feedback by just telling you how nice and well-informed your podcast show is. It's just full of pure aviation. It gets me well-informed and up-to-date of what's going on in the world of aviation.
Well, it's full of something, that's for sure.
On pretty much a daily basis. I'd like to start once again. The reason why I'm sending you this audio feedback is about audio feedback and a link that a guy sent you about a 777 starting to do his takeoff roll and then stopping on the runway and then taking off again. I'd like to it's kind of odd, and yeah, like you said, we really don't see those things here in the States. Actually, if I was ever involved in a situation like that with I need to stop, I would just, stop the airplane, taxi it out the runway, and do the proper checklist. But I'd like to send you a link of a video on YouTube of MD-80 taking off in Connecticut, where the pilot, as soon as the pilot was making a turn to get into the runway, and he spooled up the engines too quick and too soon. That's the word I'm looking for. And he actually ended up skidding in the runway, and you can clearly see smoke coming out of the front tires or the front landing gear, and you can see some major rudder deflection to compensate the skidding in the runway, and then stopping the airplane for a couple of seconds, no more than 2 or 3 seconds, and then taking off again. Okay, and also to see whenever you have a chance to check the Hispanic Pilots Association. I'm a member of that because I'm Latin and Hispanic, and just lots of information about that, and see if you can talk about that in not only the Hispanic Pilot Association, but Pilot Association and all the things that these organizations have to offer, and all the information, and things to look for in this type of communities too. Okay, once again, Captain Jeff, thank you. I'll be sending you the link of the video on YouTube on the MD-80 on your Facebook page. Thanks so much. Hope to talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks, Alex, for your feedback. And Alex and I have been kind of communicating with each other back and forth on the Facebook page, and you can find that at facebook.com/Airline Pilot Guy. The first thing he was talking about was that feedback that I received several episodes back, where there was a video of I'm forgetting the airline based in Hong Kong. That's okay. It doesn't matter. A 777 taking off and starting the takeoff roll and getting a good distance down the runway, and then stopping, and then restarting the takeoff roll and continuing the takeoff. And I was mentioning that I didn't think that was right. I know for sure that you wouldn't do that in our country, in the United States, because that would certainly generate a lot of attention and probably would require a lot of reporting to explain why you did such a thing. Because remember, our performance data is based on all the numbers that we use for speeds for takeoff and maximum runway allowable weights and climb limit weights and everything else is all based on starting the takeoff roll from a certain point. So if you've already started your roll, stopped, and then started another roll at a certain point down the runway, your performance data is not valid anymore. And so if anything ever happened, you'd be, questioned about why you didn't pull off the runway. And run some checklists, make sure that everything was okay, check your brake limit temperatures and that kind of thing, brake energy, to see whether or not you'd have to wait a certain amount of time before you attempted another takeoff, etc. A lot of things to consider there. The link that Alex was talking about, and we've talked about this before on the show, where the MD-88 was taking the runway, and I believe it wasn't Connecticut. I think it was in Norfolk, Virginia, taking off on runway 5. And apparently, I don't know the circumstances. We don't hear the ATC communications. Perhaps somebody was in a short final. They're telling the flight to expedite, cleared for an immediate takeoff. In other words, we're in a hurry. Let's get out of here. Spooling up the engines, perhaps a little bit of moisture on the runway, whatever. Clearly, the nose wheel is in a skid. In fact, the nose wheel seems to be deflected quite a bit, almost 90 degrees, and a lot of smoke coming from the nose wheel. You can hear the engines spool back. The nose wheel nose wheels are recentered, power comes back on, they continue the takeoff roll and blast off out of Norfolk. And we discussed, you know, if he knew that that kind of skidding was occurring, he probably would have stopped the takeoff and exited the runway and, had some kind of inspection performed. I have a feeling that added a little bit of power too early, as you say, Alex, too soon, and realized that it wasn't tracking the way it should be down the runway. Probably had no idea it was putting out all that tire smoke and everything else, and got it under control and then continued. So don't know all the circumstances there, but definitely was an odd looking video. And let's see, the last thing you talked about was Hispanic Pilots Association. Don't know, or organization. I don't really know a lot about that because I'm not Hispanic myself, but it sounds like a great organization. There are all kinds of pilot associations and organizations out there that serve many purposes. We have a pilots association that I'm a member of, the Airline Pilots Association, which is basically our union that helps us negotiate our contracts, protects us when we are accused of doing wrong, etc. A lot of different way too many things to mention on this podcast. What your pilots union is there to help you to do. And there are fraternal type of organizations where they're perhaps more social. Perhaps the Hispanic Pilots Association or Hispanic Pilots Organization is there to kind of support a minority of pilots out there in the workforce and kind of address their specific needs, etc. So it sounds like a great thing. I'll try to find, you didn't give me a link to that, Alex, but I'll certainly try to find a link to that organization in case anybody's listening who may be Hispanic and want to join that organization. So, as always, I do appreciate your feedback, Alex. And let's see, speaking of Miami, you say you are living down there. I'm heading to Miami on Monday. I'll be laying over there, actually flying into Fort Lauderdale, taking a limo to Miami, staying at the downtown Hilton. And I'm meeting somebody that I've talked about on an earlier podcast, and I think that you'll find this interview that I'm going to have with this gentleman quite interesting. In fact, I might make it a special episode just on the interview with this person. Again, I think you'll find it interesting, and I'm looking forward to meeting him on Monday. So stay tuned for that, and let's play some more audio feedback, this time from, again, over the pond, or across the pond.
Hi, Captain Jeff. It's Tim Foley here in Guildford in the United Kingdom again. And I'm sending you some feedback to bring your attention to two bits of British Airways news over here in London. The first piece of news is that British Airways have taken delivery of the first Boeing 787 Dreamliner, which they're going to use on some routes to Toronto and Newark from London Heathrow. And I've just seen a picture of it, and it's I really think with that wing design, it looks like a pretty aircraft. I'm looking forward to seeing those planes more often in the skies above Surrey, where I live. And the second piece of news is that British Airways have decided to permit passengers to activate the mobile telephones once the plane lands and while it is still taxiing. The current rules, I believe, say that while the engines are operating on the ground, you're not to use your phones. But British Airways have said, well, actually, we don't think it's dangerous for you to activate your phones as soon as the plane touches down. And the Civil Aviation Authority here in the UK have said, yeah, that's fine by them. So the rules are changing on British Airways flights, and it's the first European carrier to permit this kind of thing. Now, I really should admit that I have been a rule breaker in the past, and I have turned on my phone before the plane has got to the gate. Just got to pick up those text messages. I have to say, it did seem to me to be absolutely absurd not to permit this kind of thing. If you accept for one moment that mobile phone signals do interfere with the navigation, quite frankly, once you're on the ground, if the pilot needs the navigation to find the gate, he doesn't really deserve to be in the pilot's seat in the first place. So I guess with minimal risk of getting lost on the ground, it's safe to put on your phone. I'm glad that common sense appears to have prevailed. I'm sure there will be some naysayers out there that will say that this is yet another part of our life where mobile phones are impinging upon, but I guess that's just modern life. Anyway, I hope you're well, and that your family's well, and that your mum is doing well. And again, looking forward to the next podcast. Keep up the great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. And I agree. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner is a beautiful airplane, that beautiful wing. And I believe also the Airbus 350 has a really nice wing, very similar to the 787 wing. And I'm all for beautiful flying machines being in great proliferation around us. Let's see, what was the other thing you mentioned? Oh, the phones. Believe it or not, I think most U.S.-based airlines have been doing this sort of thing for quite some time. I know that at my airline, we have allowed cell phones to be turned on once we've landed, taxiing into the gate for quite some time, at least a couple of years, maybe longer. And you're right. Well, first of all, I don't believe that these things are interfering at all in navigation, but assuming that, as you say, they do, obviously it's not such a necessity when you've made it to your destination and you're taxiing in, because if a pilot cannot find the gate without using some kind of a navigation system, then yeah, I agree with you. Your sentiments regarding that. Thank you, Tim, for your feedback, and thank you for your concern about my family and my health and my family's health. I do appreciate that. And I hope you and yours are doing well also. And let's continue on the roll with some feedback, audio feedback. This is from a young listener. His name is Josh. He sent me feedback before. And this is actually a movie he sent me. It kind of gets cut off at a certain point. It's only it's a pretty short video, but in it he is basically shooting the video of his big screen TV, and I think he has an Xbox connected to it, and he's showing me something that he has created, I believe, in Minecraft. Right, Josh? Is that what you've used to create the airplane that you've built or designed? I think that's what's going on here, and I really appreciate his effort, and so I thought I'd play the audio of his video, and I'll include. Well, I'm not sure if I can do this, because perhaps if I can figure out a way to upload his video to make it a link for you to watch as well, I'll do that. Otherwise, you'll just have to listen to his audio. That'll have to suffice. So here we go. This is Josh.
Hello, Captain Jeff. This is Josh from Northfield, Vermont. I wanted to show you my Xbox 360 airplane. So here I am. I was invisible earlier.
Invisible?
Okay, I'm trying to walk through this. So here I am. Okay, so let's get back in this view. And as you can see, here's the giant aircraft.
By the way, he said, here I am. And there's this, it almost looks like a Lego, maybe it's a Lego game, I'm not sure. But it's like one of these characters, but it's in, the character is dressed in a pilot's uniform with stripes in the sleeves and everything else. Pretty cool. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
There's a sheet. I'm in creative. The tower of that. So here's my giant airplane. I mean, one of the engines is bad is because I kind of made it. So, yeah. And I didn't know how to make it at the time. See, I didn't make this entire aircraft. My friend me, Jacob, and my friend Chris made it. So I thought
And that was it. It just stopped. So apparently Josh had some help from Jacob and Chris, his friends, as well, making this airplane. So again, if I can figure out a way for you to watch that, I'll put a link in the show notes. Otherwise, thank you, Josh, for sending me in that feedback. Very, very interesting stuff. And let's see, one more, at least, piece of feedback that I received just, I don't know, about 5 days ago from Joseph Lee, Joe Lee. And let's hear what he has to say.
Hi, Captain Jeff. Hi, listeners of the podcast. I don't know if you... This is Joseph Lee calling from somewhere in Southern California, although I'm originally from Shanghai, China. I don't know if you just heard my newborn boy crying in the background. Anyways, first of all, on a personal note, Captain Jeff, the reason why I'm in Southern California is we're taking care of some health issues of myself, of one of my kids, and also having an extended vacation here. So far, the outcomes are all good. We should be on our way back to Asia pretty soon, about a week, 10 days time. On that note, I remember hearing mentioning that part of the family, your mom and your sisters, they live in somewhere in Southern California. I believe Orange County, somewhere in Orange County, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just curious how far we are actually from where your family is. Without you divulging any further, personal information, just so you know, I'm somewhere almost right in between the midpoint between Ontario International Airport and John Wayne at Santa Ana, Orange County. So we're in a city called Diamond Bar. Moving on to feedback to your recent podcasts. Of course, have to mention the Asiana crash at SFO. It is particularly personally heartbreaking because first of all, the flight actually originated from my hometown, Shanghai, before having a stopover in Seoul and going on to SFO. Asiana flights are particularly popular with Chinese travelers because compared to direct flights between China and the U.S., having a stopover in Korea actually keeps the overall airfare really low, so it's fairly attractive, especially in the summer season. And all these three fatalities, fairly young folks, teenagers, are from China, actually from a town that's about just 200 kilometers south of Shanghai, my hometown. And as you know, they were supposed to go to a church-sponsored camp in Southern California. And our prayers and thoughts go with the victims and their families. Interestingly, I was reading something about the Korean Air 801 crash in the U.S. territory of Guam in 1997. I just can't help but notice quite a bit of similarities in these two crashes. The Korean Air 801 crash in 97 was also a CFIT-controlled flight into terrain, and also it was the runway that the airliner crashed on was actually the ILS glide-slope beamer was also not operative, I believe. And I hate to draw any national or racial sort of stereotypes, but it was also a Korean carrier with Korean crew. In fact, there was actually a very popular book whose title I forgot that actually dedicated a chapter to Korean Air 801 crash. They used that to talk about the authoritarian and hierarchical style and culture in the cabin among some of the Asian carriers and Asian countries, and actually talked about how Korean Air, after realizing that being an issue, actually started to rectify some of the company policies and procedures. And the key focus is I believe in the 801 case, the pilot flying was the captain, and the pilot monitoring was the co-pilot, first officer. But the first officer was the one who noticed that there were some problems with the manner they were flying or they were approaching. But he kept his mouth shut because he didn't want to challenge authority. I don't quite think that this is the case with Asiana this time, and I hate to draw any premature conclusions like you suggested on my Facebook post. But let's wait and see if there are any cultural elements that contributed to the accident. But other than that, I think I hope the investigation by NTSB could quickly result in something that's informative, but also would help the airline industry and its practitioners rectify some of the issues and problems and make air travel even safer. And I understand from having watched many air crash investigation documentaries that every accident brings about or has brought about numerous safety regulations, procedures, and technologies that resulted in a much safer air travel today. So as tragic as an accident is, I hope this brings about some good outcome. Actually, that is about it. And Tailwind's Unlimited Visibility, hope you're all well and your family well. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you for your kind wishes. And first of all, let me say that I hope that you and your child undergoing the health treatment are doing fine, and hopefully that's successful for you. And thank you for your well wishes for my mother. She is suffering from Parkinson's disease, and yes, they do live out in Southern California, not very far at all from where you're staying right now. You said you were going to be leaving in about a week to 10 days, so if my calculations are correct, you're still out there in Southern California, and they are living in the Seal Beach, Los Alamitos area, kind of north of Huntington Beach and south, or, well, I always get everything mixed up there, not really south, but kind of southeast from Long Beach. And that's Long Beach is where I was born. I grew up until I was 13 years old in Los Alamitos, California, where the 405 and the 605 come together there. Rossmore. That was the actual neighborhood in which I grew up. A lot of fond memories there. So that is, excuse me, the basically where the Orange County and LA counties kind of butt up against each other. So not far at all from where you are in Southern California. Regarding the Asiana crash, yes, it was a sad thing, and I can understand your connection with this whole incident because the schoolgirls that were killed in this accident going to the summer camp in Southern California didn't come from too far from where you are from, Shanghai, China. Regarding the Korean Air 801 flight that crashed in Guam in 1997, I think you said. Yeah, that was one of those classic cases of the glide slope is NOTAMed out of service, and they basically flew the approach as if the glide slope was actually working and flew a perfectly good airplane right into the ground. For those of you listening who have some experience with instrument flying, you know that if you fly an ILS approach localizer only, in other words, just a lateral guidance to the runway, and the glide slope is out of service, that depending on the instrument display that you're using, your glide slope bug or indication may look like you're right on the glide slope. And it may or may not have a flag to alert you to the fact that what you're looking at there is not an actual glide slope. So you can kind of see, this is not the first time this has happened where people have crashed flying a non-precision localizer non-precision approach without the glide slope. And as you mentioned, Joe, in that case, culture and the authoritarian hierarchical kind of system at Korean Air at the time was a major factor in that accident because, as you mentioned as well, at least one of the crew members knew that what the captain, the pilot flying, was doing was not right, but did not speak up. I kind of call that syndrome the co-pilot-itis, and that happens whether you're Korean or you're U.S. citizen or whatever you are, whatever your background is. That's easy to kind of fall into that hole, and we have to be careful about that. So if you're listening out there and you're a first officer, and look, I'm telling you from experience, I've experienced co-pilot-itis, where you're witnessing something. It's kind of hard for you to believe that you're watching it, that you're experiencing it, and at the same time you're reluctant to say anything about it. So that's definitely a danger to flight safety, and it's something that we have to overcome to ensure that safety of flight is assured at all times. And so again, I don't know if the Asiana 214 crash had the same kind of factor going on with the culture thing. I think that will be a factor in this accident, but I'm not sure if it's going to be a major factor, but we'll have to just wait and see. Again, we'll find out more about the final judgment of the National Transportation Safety Board investigation in approximately a year. And yeah, that's about it. So thank you, Joe, and by the way, Joe used the Google Voice feedback line, the 30499 pilot line. I set that up initially for you to have a way to send me feedback, audio feedback. It turns out that there are some limitations using Google Voice, which Joe found out. In fact, that feedback that he sent me was actually 3 separate messages because Google Voice imposes a 3-minute limit on your message. And that's not anything that I have any control over. I looked through the settings to see if I could extend that in some way. You can't. So I kind of spliced all 3 of those voice messages that Joe gave me together and cleaned it up as much as I could. That's the other issue with using that APG feedback number is that the quality is not the best. The call quality kind of varies considerably. Sometimes it's great audio quality, and sometimes it's like somebody calling on a line, that's going under the oceans of the world from the other side of the world, like a watt. What do they call those things back in the day? The Watts lines, something like that. Anyway, if you want to send me audio feedback, the better way to do it would be to go to the website and click on the Send Me a Voicemail tab on the right side of the screen, and that uses the technology called SpeakPipe. That usually results in a little bit better audio quality. However, the caveat here is that there is also a time limit there. And hey, don't worry. If you're leaving me feedback and you get cut off, I don't mind if you call back again. I can splice these things together. It's not a big deal. So don't worry about that. The best way to send in audio feedback is to use the voice memo app on your smartphone or whatever recording app you might have on your Android phone, your Windows phone, your BlackBerry, whatever iPhone. Use that because it's very high quality sound, and then send it. Basically what happens is it attaches the audio and send it to feedback at airlinepilotguy.com. And there's no time limit. Maybe that's not a good thing. Don't go too crazy with that because you know how, listen to me right now, I'm rambling on and on and on, and that's why these shows are so darn long, because I don't know when to shut up, and we certainly don't want you to add to the length of the program unnecessarily, that is. So, but anyway, if you're concerned about time limits and audio quality, use your smartphone or whatever to record a message and send it to feedback at Airline Pilot Guy. That's the best way to do it. So, thank you, Joe, for sending in the feedback, and I believe that is the last piece of audio feedback that I had intended to play on today's episode, and it's getting to be a long one again, and I think it's time. I know I still have a lot of feedback to address, but I'm making some pretty decent dents in it right now, and it's time though to call it quits for tonight. It is now past considerably past midnight, and I've been up since 3:30 this morning. I'm tired. Time for me to get some sleep. So we talked about all the ways you can send feedback. Feedback at airlinepilotguy.com, the 304-99-pilot feedback line, the send voicemail tab on my website, and your own recording app, attaching it, sending it to feedback at Airline Pilot Guy. On Facebook, you can find me, Airline Pilot Guy, all one word, and on Twitter, again, all one word, Airline Pilot Guy, and my website, airlinepilotguy.com. And Stitcher Radio is also a place that you can listen to me on, and you can download the Stitcher app by heading over to stitcher.com/airlinepilot, or check out your device's app store. Remember, Stitcher Smart Radio is the smarter way to listen to radio. And until next time, wishing you clear skies, unlimited visibility, and tailwinds. Take care, and God bless. Good night.
Good day.